Imagine this, you just watch one of the worst things you've seen in a very long time, and thus you have an intense urge to swallow bleach and pour acid into your eyes. So, you're standing there, bleach in hand, but just before you pour yourself a nice cocktail of pain, you decide to check Netflix. And for once in your life, Netflix decides to be kind to you. There, in the Netflix spotlight, is a movie. A movie which looks, at the very least, entertaining. So, you put down the bleach and decide to watch it. And that was my introduction to Nimona. Well, I may have embellished a little, but you get the idea. After watching The Idol, I decided I need to remind myself that there is such a thing as, good movies and shows. So I decided to just throw myself into the abyss and watch something new, and oh buddy, was it worth it. So, why is Nimona so great? What makes it so special? Well, why don't we get into it? So, before I get into the details of what makes this movie so fantastic, I'll try to convince the ones that haven't watched it to watch it. So what's it actually about? Well, based on the graphic novel by ND Stevenson, who you may know for the She-Ra reboot, Nimona is set in a futuristic medieval society, yes, weird mix I know, which was created by the great hero Glorif. Look, that's a big ass statue of her, to keep out the dangers and the monsters of the outside world. And, to uphold the safety of their city, the Institute and its Order of Knights was created. Our main character, Ballister, is one of those knights. Or at least will soon be one of those knights. But, you won't be surprised to learn that he's a little bit different, as he's the first knight who isn't from one of the noble houses. However, he was allowed into the order by the queen herself, who believes it's time to make changes within their society. Of course, as you can probably guess, things do not go as planned, as during the knighting ceremony the queen is killed by the sword which Ballister was holding. Of course, Ballister isn't actually responsible, so, framed for the queen's murder, he manages to escape, though he loses his arm in the process. And so begins his quest to prove his innocence, and to find the person actually responsible. And helping him along the way is the shapeshifter Nimona, who just kinda inserts herself into Ballister's investigation. But of course, during their investigation they uncover some dark secrets, which of course brings Ballister in conflict with the institution which he once served, and with the man that he loves. There, does that make it sound interesting enough for you? No? Need more? Alrighty then. In case you either have been keeping your eyes closed for the past several minutes, have no eyes, or have some strange condition which causes you to be unable to perceive what's currently on your screen, the animation is gorgeous. Character designs are fantastic, and the way that they're animated is lively and full of personality. You can get a sense for each character's, character just from the way that they're animated. And of course, the environments are also full of life and history. The way in which they blend the medieval culture and architecture with sci-fi is extremely well done. And of course, the characters are fantastic as well. They're obviously entertaining, but they're also fantastically written. Each character has a logical, clear, and understandable motivation, and the arcs each of them has are interesting and at times pretty surprising. Now, of course, I will mention some potential deal breakers, just to be completely fair. The themes and message of the movie aren't exactly the most original. You probably won't be surprised to learn that the movie deals with themes of not belonging and of societal discrimination. They're not exactly the most original themes, but personally I don't think that's a problem, and I think that Nimona goes about its message in quite an interesting way. Along with that, some people might not like just how many jokes there are. If Kung Fu Panda is too much for you, then you probably won't like Nimona. Now then, go watch Nimona. If you're still here, you either already watched Nimona, or you could not give less of a fuck about spoilers, which probably is a good chunk of you, actually. So let's move on to the actual plot, eh? Ballister is kind, heroic, and just a tad naive, as shown by the fact that the first step in his plan is to go get the help of his totally just friend, Ambrosius Golden Loin. And what's his plan to get the help of his friend? Well, it's to sneak into the Institute to find Golden Loin.
Have fun getting arrested.
I am not gonna get arrested! Murderer!
That's not edited, by the way. Anyways, they do in fact escape.
I told you.
No! Cloris!
Hey, boss.
Wait, how did you get out?
I know the code. Beep bop boop beep bop.
Invalid password.
And this is just one example of why, even outside the great story, this movie is great. Because it's fun. It's a breath of fresh air after how bland most animated movies have become, at least from the big Western studios. The movie has its own style, its own personality. It's lively without detracting from the story, which is quite a bit more than I can say about most original animated Disney movies from the last couple years. The remakes don't count, though they're even worse in that regard. So, of course, the Institute, and thus the director, decides that they need to capture not just Ballister, but also Nimona, as she's, helping a fugitive, and she's also a monster. So this delightful asshole decides that he'll be the one to find Bal. But Golden Loin decides to take the task upon himself instead. While that's happening, Bal and Nimona are trying to come up with, a new plan. Bal realizes that the one person who might know where the fake sword used to kill the queen came from is the squire. So they go out in search for him. General hijinks ensue, and they manage to kidnap the squire, who shares the truth with them. Now then, before we unpack that twist, let's examine some of the characters. Ballister is, as I said, heroic, brave, and just a little bit naive. He obviously trusts the Institute, after all, it's the pillar of their society, and as far as he knows, there's nothing but danger outside the walls of the city.
Don't you get it? The second we let our guard down, something terrible comes over that wall.
Have you ever even been outside the wall?
No one has.
So maybe there's nothing there?
And of course, he doesn't have the greatest reaction when he learns that Nimona is, a monster. After all, he was supposed to become a knight. And part of being a knight, and possibly the most important job of the knights, is to keep the city safe from monsters. But what sets him apart from those around him, from the rest of his society, is that he is open-minded enough to consider that maybe, just maybe, he's in the wrong. Which, I know, that seems so obvious, right? Just look through Twitter. That'll remind you of how many people don't have that simple-ass ability. Ballister is willing to get to know Nimona, learn what she's like.
What does it feel like?
Pretty stabby. In my leg region.
Oh, no, the shape shifting.
Nimona is, of course, just as interesting. She's an outsider, an outcast. She's been branded a villain. She isn't actually a villain, though. Yeah, she obviously fucks shit up, but she doesn't really do anything truly heinous. But the label she's been branded with has convinced her that she truly is a bad guy. And this has a more interesting explanation later, but we'll get there. Now, while having a strong set of protagonists is obviously the most important part of a story, having a strong set of secondary characters is almost as important. And the best example of this is Golden Loin. It's a fucking stupid name, though. Bal and Golden Loin's relationship is obviously pretty complicated. They love each other, of course, but they're on opposite sides. And Golden Loin, of course, wants to believe Bal. But the evidence against Bal is pretty fucking strong. And as you may expect, Golden Loin is getting just a little bit suspicious of the director. And so he confronts her.
Ever since I was young, I've had the same nightmare. I find a crack in the wall. I yell out. No one listens, and the crack grows bigger and bigger until the wall crumbles and the monsters pour in. I begged the Queen not to question the word of Glorith, not to question what's kept us safe for 1,000 years, but she wouldn't listen. Allowing Ballister to hold the sword was the first crack in the wall, and now we have a monster in our kingdom.
And then she stabs Golden Loin. Oh yeah, except for the fact that that isn't Golden Loin, and the director is left just a little bit speechless as Bal and Nimona fuck off. Now, let's get back to that twist, eh? Now, while I wouldn't say that the twist is the most surprising or original, I do think that the director makes for a pretty good antagonist to our dear heroes. But why is that? I mean, most recent big animated movies have had similar twist villains, so how does the director work when all these other guys don't? Well, it's simple. Her fucking motives make sense. After all, in her mind, she isn't doing anything wrong. She's just keeping her people safe from the dangers of the outside world. And to her, any change to Galora's vision for their society is a threat to that society. Her flaw is an inability to consider the possibility that she's wrong, that perhaps their society isn't perfect, and a willingness to do anything for Galora's vision. Of course, the performance from Frances Conroy goes quite a long way to make the director believable. It's wonderfully sinister, without making it feel like she enjoys any of what she does. So, with the director's confession now all over Sci-Fi Medieval Twitter, Bal and Nimona party. Because, you know, what else are you gonna do? But then, Bal receives a message. A message from Golden Loin, as the director has given him new information. And so, Bal and Golden Loin meet up at an inn, where it's revealed that Glorif's views weren't completely unfounded. There were indeed dangerous monsters, and Nimona was indeed one of them. Bal, obviously, refuses to continue listening and leaves. But unfortunately for him, they weren't actually alone. When Bal gets home, he confronts Nimona about what he's learned. And this is one of my few complaints. This scene feels just a little out of character for him. Yes, certainly this revelation should concern him, but on the other hand, this could easily be a lie made up by the director to try and divide them. And not to mention, he knows Nimona. And yes, it's possible that she's a fantastic manipulator, but again, why would he trust info that could, and does, come from the director? It certainly doesn't ruin the movie, but it was noticeable. Now, as their argument reaches its climax, it's interrupted by asshole Trevor, and Nimona manages to escape, but Bal isn't quite so lucky. And after running for a while, Nimona reaches a clearing with a well that she's visited before. Now, we flash back to before the town was the great sci-fi medieval metropolis that it is today. To back when it was just a town, a small village in the hills. We learn that Glorif wasn't some great hero defending her town from a deadly monster. She was just a child, and she was Nimona's friend. And even when Nimona revealed her true nature, Glorif still accepted her, because she's a child. She didn't have any prejudice, but when the townspeople found out about their friendship, they were terrified. And even these people, they aren't evil because they don't know any better. That doesn't justify their actions, but they aren't evil for simply being ignorant. The evil is ignorance, and the societal pressure to conform to societal views. And Glorif does conform, which leads to her being turned into something that she wasn't. A hero. And as Nimona remembers her trauma, she ends up turning into the monster that people see her as. And so the now monstrous Nimona makes her way into the city, trying to reach the statue of her former friend. And in the process, she unintentionally endangers the city, and eventually she reaches the statue. but Ballister stops her. But even though Nimona has returned to her harmless true state, the director cannot see past what she's been taught, and thus, she still tries to kill Nimona, even though that will also kill an untold amount of civilians. But Nimona stops her, sacrificing herself in the process. If you can't tell, I really like this movie. I think this movie is absolutely fantastic. Certainly one of the best things I've seen so far this year. Now, it's a fantastic mix of comedy, without it distracting from the story. Characters are also fantastically written. Nimona is incredibly entertaining, while also being a much deeper character than she seems at first. Ballister is perhaps not the most interesting character I've ever seen, but he's still interesting and engaging enough. Golden Loin is also interesting, as he is much like Ballister, but they're brought in conflict simply because they're on opposite sides. They're separated through no fault of their own. And of course, the director makes for a good villain, as she's evil and irredeemable, but at least in her mind, she has good reasons for what she does. She doesn't do what she does for fun, but because she thinks it's necessary. Because she sees herself as a hero, saving the people. It helps, of course, also that the setting is also so unique, and the world feels fleshed out and alive. You can see the history and feel that people actually, live their daily lives in this world. Now, of course, some people will, again, criticize the movie for not having the most original themes and message. And honestly, that's true. And I'd say a valid criticism. It doesn't bother me personally, but it will bother some. Although, I will say that a lot of movies have similar premises and themes. It's not so much about just how original of a premise you have, or how original your ideas are. It's about how you bring those ideas, how you bring that message. Not so much about the message itself. Though don't get me wrong, the message itself and the themes are obviously also important. Now though, if there is one complaint I have, if there's a second complaint I have, it would be the very end of the movie.
Hey, boss.
Personally, I feel that it would have been better to leave it ambiguous whether Nimona was still alive. Just have a knock at the door, but nothing concrete. But honestly, that's a fairly minor criticism, I can look past it. If you've somehow managed to make it to the end without watching the movie, then you should. You really should. Basically said everything I wanted to say. There's not much more I can say. So, watch it, why don't you? I have other things to work on. Thank you for watching. Like if you like this video. Maybe subscribe. If you want, or don't, it's up to you. See you in like a week and a half.